This is Stanley bringing you the sound doctrine of the Bible. We continue from what we saw in the previous segment.
There are 3 steps in Bible study. Number 1, observation. Number 2, interpretation. And number 3, application. What is observation? We find out what does this passage say. When you find an answer to the question, you have observed it enough. And what is interpretation? What does this passage mean? Thirdly, application. What does this passage mean to me? In other words, how does it apply to me? Very simple steps, but very important. What does this passage say? What does this passage mean? What does this passage mean to me? In observation, we discover the message. In interpretation, we digest the message. In application, we demonstrate the message. One is the discovery of the message. The other is the digestion of the message. And the third is the demonstration of the message. We usually jump from observation to application. We skip the middle but very important step called interpretation. Almost all the false doctrines have come up because of our failure to spend enough time in the middle step, the link step, that is interpretation. If you skip this essential step of interpretation, you are in for trouble. This step of interpretation is called by Paul as rightly dividing the word of truth. Turn with me to 2 Timothy 2nd chapter and verse 15. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The right translation is rightly cutting the word of truth. Rightly cutting the word. That's the meaning, the rightly cutting the word. He was a tent maker by profession. Tents those days were made of skins of animals. And it was done like a patchwork of different pieces of skin put together, like the shamina we have in North India. And if the cutting is not proper, the pieces will not fit together properly. So if you make a wrong cutting, when you want to put them together, each one will drag in different direction. The workman, that is the tent maker, will be ashamed. If the cutting is not proper, the tent maker will be ashamed, the tailor will be ashamed, and the Bible teacher also will be ashamed. So right interpretation will lead to right application. Wrong interpretation will lead to wrong application. If you apply any biblical truth without proper interpretation, today and tomorrow, both before men and God, you will be ashamed. I will give a simple example, but very delicate example. Nobody should be upset, but it is an example. 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, my sister-in-law took 5 college girls for water baptism to a very senior pastor in Madras. The pastor said, I can baptize these 3 girls, but the other 2 girls I cannot. Because the 3 girls are wearing studs, no problem. The other 2 are wearing rings, so problem. So if you want me to baptize, you ask the 2 girls with the rings to remove. The girls with studs, no problem. The girls with studs, they were a majority. But my sister-in-law is very smart. She told the pastor, what's the difference between a ear stud and a ear ring? If your doctrine is on that, I'm sorry, I'll take them to another pastor. After 5 years, in the same church, whether it is stud or ring or dolak, you will be baptized. Because if you put some emphasis on that, people won't come to you for baptism, they will go to another church. And there is another very senior Pentecostal church in India. They said, we 12, no baptism and no bread break. But some of their American missionaries came to the church. They all had drinks. They didn't know what to do. So they came to a compromise. During baptism, remove. After baptism, replace. During marriage, no jewels. After marriage, any amount of jewels. If you want jewels, we will not bless the jewels. Ask another pastor bless the jewels. But we will bless the couple. See, you are getting into complications. You are ashamed. See, step by step you are coming down. The important step of interpretation is not properly handled. Not only this, 101 doctrines that we are practicing, wherever the interpretation is not proper, it shall be shaken. Now, what are we trying to say here? Interpretation is the most important step before studying the Bible and applying the Bible. Otherwise, we will be put to shame not only before God, but also before man. Having said all that, is interpretation so easy? Very difficult. Because the Bible is a very ancient book. First book of the Old Testament was written 1400 years before Christ. And if we accept book of Revelation as the last book of the New Testament, that was written 90 years after Christ. Now, if you add the 2000 years in between for these two figures, some of the books in the Bible were written 3400 years ago, and the latest book was written 1900 years ago. I want you to do a lot of imagination. Some books written 3400 years before, and the latest books 1900 years ago. Roughly on the average, between the readers and the time of writing, there are at least 3 millennia of time. 3000 years is not a small period. Books written 100 years ago, some of the language you cannot read. Now we have a book in our hand which is on the average 3000 years old. Now we are going to study something about this gap. And when we understand that gap properly, interpretation is going to become easier and easier. There are at least 6 gaps we can think of between the time the Bible was written and the time in which the Bible is studied now.
We'll continue our study in the next segment. God bless you.